throughout 2020, I have been working with campaign groups for children and getting children at the centre of policy. So I work with Safe Screens and I work with health professionals for Safer Screens. That means I'm seeing kids every day come into my surgery with loads and loads of different issues. There must be other health professionals out there with seeing these issues. We now have in our network who are paediatricians, optometrists, psychologists, psychiatrists, speech and language therapists, who all have concerns about screens and screen use and the issues around it. You won't be surprised to hear that the thing we're most worried about is smartphones. And we're worried about smartphones not just because of the content, and a lot of the content isn't good. It's because they are addictive by design. They are designed to make us addicted to it. So if we struggle, our kids struggle. But it's really important for us all to have a conversation about it and come to your own decisions and thoughts around it.
Many of you already know me because I have been a member of the staff at Cargerfield now for nearly a quarter of a century. And in that time, things have changed a lot. I've been a teacher since the mid-1980s when schools were just beginning to get the most basic of computers. Mobile phones, smartphones, Snapchat, TikTok, all of those things were just something we never even imagined would happen. I've been involved in child protection safeguarding here probably think now for almost 20 years, and the things that we are dealing with now are completely different from what I was dealing with in the early days. Now a lot of the issues are arising from experiences children are having on smartphones, things that perhaps not that well equipped to cope with, things that perhaps we as adults are not particularly informed about. So it's a learning process not just for children but also for adults, and I think that's quite a scary thing.
My role is supporting staff across the whole of Edinburgh Council to look at child protection. I've been a social worker for about 25 years, and I suppose that gives me a really sinister and worrying view of the risk because I see the really worrying stuff. But I'm also a mum to a 15-year-old girl. One is, the internet isn't a thing, it's a place. And if I can give you one piece of advice, it's a place that your children are going. And it's about thinking about where are they going, who are they with, can they go on their own or do I need to go with them? Is it a place I'm familiar with? Because that's really important. And it's then about thinking about your child's digital well-being and digital resilience when they're in that place. The other thing for me, and I like being controversial, is the kids are not the issue. We are. Parents are the issue. It's really important that the message we give tonight is that the technology isn't the problem, the device isn't the problem, it's what our kids are having access to. Okay, so my 15-year-old, when she's in her bedroom of an evening and I open the door to check on her, I have to say, who's in the room with you? Because the chances are she's on FaceTime to somebody else, okay? It's a place, so not only is she in her bedroom, but she's also somewhere else. And I think what I really worry about is that we are looking at the online world through our generational eyes, where we didn't have that technology, where we're worried that our children aren't communicating and aren't building relationships. A lot of the work I've done is around speaking to young people, and they'll tell you, yes, we are. We're just not doing it in the way that you recognise. So I think it's really important that message about it's more than just a place of risk is really, really important. And I'm very worried that we're going to go down the same route as we have in the real world, which is we're really risk averse as parents. Anyone a child of the 80s? That's me. Do you remember that? Come in when the street lights go on. Right, in Scottish summers, that might be 10 o'clock at night, yeah? Go and see your friends, and there was no phones, there was no way to track me. I went off on my bike and off I went, okay? The thought of not knowing where my child is makes my blood go cold, because actually I've now learned that it's so good to see where she is. It doesn't tell me what she's doing, it just tells me where she is, okay? So I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that, because I think as parents we are doing a lot of damage to our kids by being really overprotective in the real world. And I think some of the research, some of the books that are coming out, my worry is that we'll be taken literally, and we're going to do the exact same thing with the online world. So it's really important that we measure that, because our kids are telling us, yes, there are worries and there are pitfalls, but there's also a lot of really good stuff that's there.
I'm working with Inspire ECD, And the reason I'm doing that is not because I'm an expert, but I'm an enthusiast. I tried to retire 3 years ago and I failed miserably. I think there's so many important issues going on in education at the moment, and I think we need to be having these conversations. I've worked with a number of organisations. I was an assistant head teacher at Haberdashers for 12 years. I was same at City London School for Girls for 6 years prior to that. I was the Independent Schools Council Chair for their digital strategy group for 15 years. I've done a lot of things, largely because I wanted to join any group that was going to have a pragmatic approach to the use of technology in schools. And I'm delighted that we're all here to start a dialogue about some of this stuff and start talking about it, because I think that's the way forward.
I am going to kick off, if you don't mind, because some people very kindly presented some questions straight away or in advance. And I thought this was quite a good one to start with. What role should parents play in monitoring their children's internet use? And I'm going to go, Arabella, to you first on that one.
We really need to think about the amount of time those children are spending on different screens, because there are so many elements that we are now seeing. If you talk to the paediatricians and you talk to the child psychologists, they're seeing huge issues with the amount of language and words that our children are picking up. And we worry about them picking up bad language from content, but actually what they're seeing is they are picking up significantly less language than they would be if they were there. So there's a terrifying study which has been replicated, which shows that for every minute of screen time that an under 3 has, they have fewer interactions and less words, and they come up with on average 1,100 less words than a child who didn't have screen time during that period, which is pretty terrifying. And it's easy as a parent to pick that up. And it then impacts attention. So I'm sure Emma finds this, that children now are harder in reception to actually engage, sit down and be quiet, because they're used to flicky TV and they're used to things changing. So the most important thing I would say is, as a parent, we need to model the behaviour we want our children to have. And it's very easy for us to be addicted to our phones and our tech. And we need to model that behaviour and show our children that they are actually, we are interested, we are engaged. It is something that they need to be involved in. And we talk about it, and that they are more important to us than our piece of tech.
Thank you very much. Leanne, what advice would you give to parents?
So a really helpful website would be Internet Matters. It's fantastic. And if you've got a child at a certain age, you can go into Internet Matters and it'll give you really good top tips, things to think about, things to do, really, really important. They've also got this great kind of digital wellbeing toolkit that you can use. When my daughter got her first mobile phone, we drew up a family contract, and she rolled her eyes as she does. That's you and that social work job of yours, Mum. But it was about us setting ground rules as a family, and that included us as the adults. So it bugs me because I do like my phone, but at 9 o'clock on a school night, the phones all are in the living room charging, okay? Because I think one of the things we need to teach our children is how to have really good boundaries about it's okay at times not to be available. So I hear it from my 15-year-old all the time. Why is he not answered? Because I know he's online. Well, maybe he's busy looking at something on Instagram and he's not quite ready to message you. So there's something about that immediate gratification that I think is absolutely having an impact on our children's mental health. So I think we need to set boundaries. We have a rule in our house if we're at the dinner table, which doesn't happen every night because we've got very busy lives, but when we are, no mobile phones. And it's my husband who thinks he's a brain surgeon that is the phone's going and he can't wait to take a work call. And it's my daughter that holds him to account for that. So there's something about that partnership working. I think the other thing I would say, and I was asked a question before we came in about, do you think your child would tell you if she's worried? I have started from quite a young age to talk to my child about if something makes you feel uncomfortable, if it gives you bad feelings in your tummy, you can come and talk to me. It does not mean you're in trouble, and it does not mean that you're not going to have your device, but it does mean that your tummy's telling you need to have a conversation with me or your dad. Because whether we like it or not, particularly sinister people out there are very good at making our kids feel completely isolated and that they can't tell us. And I think we're doing some of that education stuff too late in our curriculum, and that we need to do it much earlier. So find good places to get advice. think about the stage of development that your child is at, and you'll notice I said stage rather than age, okay? So you could have 2 kids and they're both 12. One's really mature and is absolutely ready to have a mobile phone, and another one is absolutely not ready. In the same way that one of those 12-year-olds might be mature enough to get a bus and go to granny's, and the other you're like, there's no way I'd let them get on that bus. So I think for me it's really important you're thinking about the stage that your child is at. And again, Ofcom's report that they produce that looks at kind of parents and children's kind of attitudes to technology, they've got this really helpful age and stage that they talk about. So for example, ages, I think it's 3 to 5 are called supervised explorers. Anyone got a kid aged 3 to 5? Right, so the hint's there, supervised, okay? So if you're cooking in the kitchen and you put wee Timothy on the iPad to watch Peppa Pig, and they're in the living room, then they're no longer supervised. And I would use the analogy of, would you go in the kitchen and start cooking dinner and leave your child in the front garden when they're 3? And most of you would say absolutely not.
I'm tempted to ask you, because I have to say, when you were, I don't know if anyone thought, yes, you've got children who are different ages and stages, which is very difficult as a parent to say, yes, but you're a particularly immature 15-year-old, so you can't have a phone. Whereas your brother, who obviously I love just as much, is much more mature than you, so he got one.
But you'll have other rules, won't you? You might have, I have a friend who's got 2 kids and she wouldn't leave one home alone and she would leave the other. You know, it's about, I suppose, how you have those conversations that's really, really important. But I think it's about stage, not age. So I will often get asked, how old should they be when they get a phone? It's not my decision to make. It's, you know, your child, you've got to make some of these decisions. And that's that bit then about, as a collective group of parents, if you've all got kids and they're all 4, what's your collective agreement?
I love the tummy test. I've been talking to kids of all sorts of ages, from little ones all the way to big ones, and I've talked about the tummy test always. I'd say to them, if it doesn't feel right, it's because it's not right and you need to tell someone. And I think that's and little kids can really get that. And the big kids can get it. I've also had another one, there's a book I read called The Boy with Square Eyes. Great book. And if anyone was using the computer too much, I would say, you're just going to get square eyes. You've got to go outside. And in the book, they say you have to look at the sky and wonder why. So I would just make them go out to the computer rooms to look at the sky. And this brings me back to something really simple. You've already got rules. You've got simple rules like everything in moderation. You don't need a brand new rule for using screens, because you already know. And you've already got a moral compass. A good friend of mine, Mark Steed, runs the Stanford schools, and he was at the conference for all the head teachers, not just in the UK, but also across the world, and they all met in Belfast last week. It's quite interesting, the problems that he's got in his school, the problems that we have in the UK, the problems they have in Australia, in America, in New Zealand, they're all the same. And the Internet Matters, I think, is a very good place to start. What are people doing across the world? They're doing what you're doing now. They're actually talking about it. They're developing. My current project is called Removing Digital Headaches. And I'm doing it because I don't believe you can tell people what to do. I realized when I retired that a number of people making decisions in schools may not have had all the information they needed to make those decisions well. And also, I can't go marching into head teachers' offices telling them what to do. So I thought the best thing to do was to get them together, begin these conversations, look at the evidence, look at the statistics, look what the success is, and also look what some of the failures are. And so you're doing exactly what you should be doing, which is talking about it.
Emma, I wonder if there's quite a lot said, but I wonder, and we talked a little bit about younger children and advice to parents of younger children who, in most cases, their children probably do not yet own their own device. Is there anything you would say to them?
I would say I think it's very important to remember that babies are born with very underdeveloped brains in comparison to other mammals, and that the first few years, up to the age of 5, they are developing 90% of their brain capacity. And they're hardwired to seek attention from their parents. And through that, through getting the attention from their parents, they are developing their language. The brain at that point soaks up language. You will see if you get children who have parents who speak different languages, they will pick up 2 languages really easy when they're very young, very easily. It'll be harder as you get older because their brain is wired at that point to soak up the language. They'll also understand more about how social interaction takes place. They'll look at facial expressions, they'll look at body language. They'll start to pick up clues as to what happens if I behave in this way, what happens if I behave in that way. They need to develop empathy. They also need to move, and if you put a child in front of a screen, they're not moving. Their body and their brain have to develop through jumping and rolling and climbing and lots of sensory experience, you know, almost going out into the garden and eating dirt. And rolling around in the grass and just having all these experiences. A child will never learn to build a brick tower by watching it on screen. They have to learn to do it by doing it, by thinking, by experimenting. Screens don't develop these thinking skills that they're going to need when they go to nursery, when they go into primary 1. So it's all about the experience, and I think it's really important to remember that. And the World Health Organization says that the under 2s shouldn't see screens unless perhaps they are FaceTiming grandparents or something, but that should be the limit of it. And I think you often see children, very small children, often in airports or in shops, and they're looking at this tiny screen and they are missing so much of what's going on around them. Or else you see parents pushing a pram, looking at their phone. There's no face-to-face contact, there's no interaction. And I think you need to have those building blocks in place, because that is going to develop the personality and the adult that those children become.
As I've been told by my paediatricians and speech and language therapists, is please do bedtime stories. If they could get you to do one thing more than anything else, if you have young children, don't get a screen anywhere near them at bedtime. It really mucks up their circadian rhythms, it mucks up their interaction, but a bedtime story is just a beautiful connection with your child and a beautiful linkage and language to go in. And they would also say the evidence really shows do not give your child their own device. It's one thing to go, here, watch Peppa Pig, but you give it back to mummy when you finish watching Peppa Pig, because it's not theirs. It's something they're using for a particular activity rather than being theirs. And they've done a lot of experiments in looking at young children with emotional regulation. So it's so easy to give a child a screen to calm them down, and it feels like a really good thing at the time. We've all done it. But actually in the long term it causes real problems, because children don't learn to self-soothe and they don't learn to self-regulate, and therefore it becomes a bigger deal as they get older. So we would really say don't give them their own devices if they're going to be using them, and bigger screens for their eyesight, but let them share yours, so it's not there when they're younger. This is at younger age groups. And please just talk to them, read them stories, and bedtime rhythms are amazing.
Thank you.
And a cuddle is much more important than being given a screen.
Yeah.
What point is the positive safety thing outweigh all the negative safety stuff?
The research as they get older says us being obsessed with screen time is not helpful. It's more about what they're doing when they're online. So you could have a child that's on it for 10 minutes who has a really toxic set of messages coming their way, and then you could have my kid who's FaceTiming her best friend. It's a wet, miserable night, I don't want to take her out, but she wants to blether with her, and they're watching Netflix together for 2 hours and having a wonderful time. So as they get older, it's about thinking about what they're doing rather than the length of time that they're doing it for. So I think from a safety perspective it's okay. Somebody said to me when I started letting my child walk to and from school, "You're not worried she's going to get kidnapped by a paedophile, you're a social worker." And I said, "No, I'm more worried about your child's TikTok account. Do you want to talk about that?" So there's something, isn't there, apart from being more cars on the road and cars driving faster, there is no more risk out there than there was when we were those kids, and I'm 4.5 walking a mile to and from school. So there's something about that cotton wooling, that helicoptering and that lawn mowing of smoothing everything out, that maybe that's the kind of conversations you just need to have collectively as parents. Well, actually, if they're walking to school with 3 other kids, do we really need the phone? How long's the distance? What's going to happen when they get there? So I think it's about, again, having conversations.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw in there as well that one of the great joys of my job at the moment is driving a bus into the city in the morning. And one of the things that worries me most is children on phones about to walk in front of my bus.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's doing them an awful lot of good. I think children can also be taught. They're pretty good at judging which adults to go up and speak to if they're concerned about something. I think kids have got that absolutely sorted, and we all know that if a child came up to us and said, "I'm concerned, I've got a problem," you'd sort them out.
I think it's hard work giving your child a smartphone because you have to go on the journey with them. But it's about preparing them, and I think you perhaps have to just face up to that they may come across damaging things, but are you preparing them for coping with that? Are you going through scenarios with them? Are you telling them, working out together what you would do? It's kind of preparing them for that journey into that new place.
The bottom line is we are the product, our children are the product, and our attention is the product. President Macron did a massive commission in about April time, where he had experts go away and look at all the issues and the concerns around it. And he basically said, we are going to make changes. We are not going to let children under certain ages have it. We will not let social media, because our children are not for sale. And they don't care. And they'll stand up there and go, Nick Clegg did it the other day. He stood up and said, we've put all these things in place for parents because parents want to do it. And the parents want to do it, and they're just not using it. So it's not our problem anymore. They know the evidence, they know the addiction, they know the algorithms that are getting our children. And they know there's algo speak to get around it with adults and children to talk to different areas. They care so little that they reduce WhatsApp's age from 16 to 13, even though the police are absolutely terrified about the amount of the encryption and the fact they can't actually pick up child sex abuse within that. They don't care, and that's the bottom line. And we're kidding ourselves if we think the Online Safety Act is actually going to help us, particularly when things like the Online Safety Act, at its best, it would sort out the worst amounts of, suicide indentation and self-harm and some of those areas. But what it's not going to do is pick up the obscene amount of kind of social media comparison that your child is seeing. They're not going to miss the Kim Kardashians. They're not going to miss the cosmetic surgery and all of those areas that are being pumped through the algorithms to your 12, 13-year-old daughter. And we know that 11, 12, 13-year-olds with high social media consumption are much more likely they've shown it on longitudinal studies that 2 years later they have a much higher propensity to eating disorders and eating disorder traits within it. And they don't care. They don't care, which is exactly why it's really important for us as parents and for health professionals and safeguarding to be saying this needs to stop and we need to protect our children. One of the problems with particularly smartphones, which are fundamentally different to everything else, is that a lot of people will say, my kid was fine, they weren't a problem, but they're talking about a smartphone from 6 years ago or 7 years, whenever it was. It's different. As soon as you've got the dopamine hit of likes and tweets, you're automatically seeing how popular you are, how exciting you are. And every time, we know what it's like sitting in your bag. Has someone responded to me? Are they engaging? And it's interacting. Personally, we believe that children aren't ready to have it. They grow older as they get older, and they don't actually need it. There are other ways to communicate.
So I think it's about doing your homework. So if you're going to let your kid go somewhere, Like if you're going to let your kid go to the park, you'll know exactly what's at the park. You'll know what the hazards are. You'll know they've got to cross a road. We know there's a big chute that's maybe not great. So you're going to risk assess with your child. It's exactly the same with any app, whether it's Snapchat, whether it's TikTok. It's about having that conversation. And I think for me, what I agreed with my child was I let her have WhatsApp first because I felt more comfortable with it and I felt I could keep an eye on it. But I had to talk to her about, you're now in a little WhatsApp group with your dance friends, but what if they've introduced somebody? Doesn't matter if they've introduced them, you don't know them, you can't be in a group with them. So it's about thinking about the place. Does that make sense again? And there's a lot of, Internet Matters will have a whole section on Snapchat. I think parents don't always understand about location settings. And it isn't just about a paedophile knowing where your child is. It's about that fear of missing out stuff that's awful. Did you ever remember being left out when you were young? And half the time you wouldn't have known. Your kid is now going to know because they can see their two best friends are together and they've not been invited. So it's lots of that stuff, and it's back to that digital well-being and digital resilience. Who has access to your personal story, for example? A lot of kids use their personal story as almost like a really private journal. So who would have access to that? Who would you let have your Snap locations? It's all of that stuff. A lot of parents would say, I didn't know that Snap locations was there. Then why are you letting your 13-year-old go there or your 12-year-old go there? And I think we can't be lazy as parents. That's the bottom line.
However, and this is the problem I have, and I'm going to put this out as a question, is that there used to be a thing whereby parents would look at other parents in their children's class and work out who the really liberal ones were, who were trying to be cool and impress their children, and say, you are not going to that child's house. There's no way you're spending a night over there because we've got you worked out. Nowadays, on a phone, the risks are surely, are dependent upon who is the least regulated child.
And I think we need to start looking at that more as an issue of neglect. The same as if I don't know where my 10-year-old is at 9 o'clock at night, then there are issues with that. And I think for me as a social worker, I've been quite challenging of that with other social workers, because we only look at online safety as a child protection issue often when it's involving sexual predators. We're not thinking about actually, we're really worried because that parent isn't checking on what their child is doing, and that child is sending obscene messages to another 10-year-old, for example. Because I think the other thing we're seeing is that a lot of the harmful stuff is coming down the age groups, and a lot of it's peer on peer. So the biggest risk to your child isn't going to be a sexual predator, as in a 45-year-old man sitting in his house. It's probably going to be somebody in their class, and that's the bottom line. And I think it's back to the parents who are not here tonight.
Gaming is just such a big thing, and it is something that I'm sure lots of parents throughout the school will be experiencing and loathing and hating. But my question is really, you say go there with them, which is absolutely, I 100% agree. Gaming is slightly different for me in that I don't know how to use the device and it's difficult to go into it to explore it and things like that.
So the first thing is no headsets, I think, if they're in primary school age, because not only do you want to be able to see where they are, you want to hear who they're with, okay? I'll give you an example of a dad walked into his primary 7 son's room thinking that his kid was playing with his friends. The audio jack had come out slightly and it was a man's voice. So if we go back to a place, if your kid says, I'm going to go on the PlayStation, mum, right? If you're thinking of it as a place, you're going to ask some questions. Who are you playing with? What are you playing? And you put limits then around how long that's for, and there's no headset. And I think when they first get it, and it's not going to be popular because they want to play with it in their bedroom, I would be saying that the rule is until we learn together how this is going to work, your PlayStation's in the living room, and if they're on it, you're in close proximity. That's the bit of being alongside them and with them. You can go on to PlayStation. A lot of the big companies like PlayStation, Xbox, they've got really good kind of information sections for parents. I think they've got much better, but again, your Internet Matters will have loads of good stuff about that as well. But I would say no headsets, and having a conversation about, just like if they were going to the park, who are you going with, how long are you going to be there for, right, so tease at this time, so you're going to game till this time, and then we're going to stop. I think the issue with the games like Fortnite and the addiction stuff and linked to gambling, etc., is things like that there is no end to the game. So there's no beginning and ending. And so it's about then the timer bit. And I think sometimes visual stuff. So my friend bought an egg timer and started having a visual cue because the rage that he was having when he was coming off it. So headsets are bad when they're young because you need to hear And some of the risk isn't going to be a man. It's going to be somebody's just destroyed their entire Minecraft and they're now devastated.
But like you said, it's very much, they know that if anyone else joins the game, you leave the game completely.
But we would say no devices at all in bedrooms. Take whatever age your child is, bring them down, because even smartphones late at night, the notifications, the number of schools dealing with kids who aren't sleeping properly,
But there's a difference between a school night and a weekend night,
Yeah.
which is again about teaching them to have their own boundaries, because if we put in all the solutions, we're not teaching them.
The problem is once they're in a bedroom, you lose control. I have so many friends who put them in the bedrooms because mine are a little bit older, and it's very hard to take it back out again. And those kids that are up all night, they wake up at 3 in the morning and then start playing, or they start having issues with it. And it's quite hard. It's then hard as a parent to manage it.
But there's other things you can
They
do,
can share.
like switch the internet off, or
Yes.
there's other
Exactly.
things you can do that the device might be in the room, but the access to it isn't. But I think it's also about setting those boundaries and those expectations. Like I wouldn't expect your 10-year-old to get up in the night and get the front door key, open the door and go out. So why would it be any different in terms of we've set these rules, and if you break these rules, this is what will happen next? And that's back to your family contract again. So if it doesn't feel safe for you, then you just say no, and you'll just have to deal with the repercussions that come from that.
Now, we can't have a go at WhatsApp and Instagram and all of those people for their bad practices, and they are bad, if we as parents knowingly let our children sign up for something that is not legally allowed. So I think we need as a group of parents to go, no, you can't do that, you're not allowed to, and use that at that.
But that's different if you're setting it up and saying you and I can do this together than our being on it on our own in our bedroom again.
As long as you're there the whole time with them. It's when you separate out and give them their account.
I have to say, I think it'd be very interesting if the school was used as the bad guy in this sometimes, and if actually we were to be saying those things. I mean, I know 1 or 2 head teachers who, when they make difficult decisions, blame it on the governors. And perhaps the school needs to be used as the bad guy within this, because that's certainly my view.
When you've got peer pressure and what your friends are doing as the sort of start and end of this, you sort of need to band together and have some common sense ground rules that you can share. And for me, the children my children associate with are all here. And so a starting point with some sort of reasonably uncontroversial ground rules that are situated at the school would be really helpful. And not draconian or bad cop even.
I think that's really important, is that, a bit like when you deliver sex education, you will always know that that's happening. I think the other thing though is that it's not just about saying we're going to do a lesson on it here, it's actually about that being weaved into every part of the curriculum. Yeah. I think the other thing is kids are really good in lessons at telling teachers the right answer and then going doing the complete opposite. So we can't just assume that because they've done a session on Snapchat that now means that they're safe. It's the ongoing conversations, but I think you're absolutely right, the partnership bit.
There's also... point on that as well, sorry, just quickly.
Go after you, Kirsty.
Sorry, I work at Carlton, but we are, this is the first session that we're holding of this nature, and it is quite a wide discussion. So I appreciate that some of you have got different, you're not at school, or you're part of the community, which is great, or you've got younger children or older children, so I would really appreciate some feedback from all of you, not now, but also just to come back, while it's fresh in your heads, you can grab your smartphone and really just come to us and tell us where you want us to take this next from a discussion point of view, because I think there is so much to discuss, and there are so many of you that have already given some really insightful information to us. So I think this is very much a two-way street between the school, between parents, and between our panel of advisors, because I think there's a lot more that we can get out of this, and this is a very early stage for us to foray into this. Really.
And it's a great opportunity now to actually discuss with the school what boundaries should be, and to be strong together and to work together on this, because you know what it's like. They say, oh, everyone else is using it. Well, if you're all talking and you know that everyone else isn't using it, that will give you a strength. I do think the fundamental in this, though, is still about your responsibility, your example, and building the relationships for the long term.
If you are interested, get involved in Delay Smartphones, because they've got some fabulous work. And the reason why we would say this is that, first of all, when you talk about children's rights, absolutely we need to talk to children, but we don't let children drink, we don't let children smoke. We don't we don't teach children the dangers of alcohol whilst they're sitting with cocktails in front of them, which is what you're doing when you're sitting there with a smartphone. Firstly, we are making a mistake by saying things like they need a phone to go back from school. And absolutely, I get the fact they need a phone, but they don't need a smartphone. We're using smartphone and phone interchangeably. They're not. They're fundamentally different. We need better phones. We need phones that don't have internet access, but do let our children have wallets, that do let them have access to maps, that do let have GPS data. And actually, we need to be telling manufacturers that that's what we need. Interestingly, HMD, which is old Nokia, are currently running a big consultation for parents, and they're having all these experts talking because they've seen there's an opportunity, and we as parents need to be saying we demand more. The reasons why we say this shouldn't happen, is because the smartphone's fundamentally addictive. And it is. I mean, Scotland actually has the worst addiction rates for children with smartphones of any country globally. And this was a massive WHO health and behaviour in school-aged children, which came out 2 weeks ago. And 22% of 13-year-old girls have experienced problematic social media, the average usage. The average is 11%. Can you imagine anything else that we would accept a fifth of 13-year-olds being addicted to? We just wouldn't. And when you look at the brain development, we talked about early years, and we talked about how early years is the most important developmental stage. The next most important developmental stage is through puberty. We know, and this is proper scientific, peer-reviewed stuff in really good journals, we know that teenagers who habitually check social media are shown on MRI scanning to have different brain development from those that don't. And it's actually in the area of emotional saliency and motivation and control. So the fear is that actually this is about increasing hypersensitivity. We know that 9 to 14-year-olds who have every additional hour of screen time and social media use is associated with higher odds of fears of weight gain and self-worth tied to weight, and binge and distress around binge eating 2 years later, which are key factors towards eating disorder.
Open disclosure, 20 years in mobile technology.
Oh, I knew there'd be one in the room.
I like your analogy of people understanding the internet is just another world. It's the digital world along with the physical world we live in. What is very lightly touched on here, and I think a lot of people need to get their heads around, to your point, there already are feature phones.
Yes, there are.
Right? So it's about the device you give your child. I want my 10-year-old son to go and explore. How do I allow him to explore at the moment? He can walk somewhere. That naturally sets a boundary of how far his liberty is. He's got a bike as well. He doesn't go out on his own on the bike yet. That will come. At some point, I'll let him get on a tram or a train. At some point beyond that, we'll let him get on a plane. But just like now, I'm happy for my son to go to the park, I'm not happy for him to go to Ibiza for a weekend.
Yeah.
Because he's 10.
Yeah.
Online, you can do that with
Yes,
a smartphone,
you
right?
can.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest thing parents need to do is stop obsessing about iPhones and the Samsung Galaxy. Sorry, I've sold a lot. And an iPad and the major devices. They're for fully mature grown-ups. They're not for children. And there are devices out there. You know, if you want to follow your kid and know where they are, there's the equivalent of the AirTag. There's multiple versions of it. Stitch an AirTag in a jacket, put it in their bag. You know where they are. You can find them at all points. If you want to have two-way interface, you can still use a good old pager. It works. All these phones, and it's a brilliant one. It's called the Light phone, L-I-G-H-T. I'm not sure if it's got in any of the screen associations.
No,
it's a brilliant device. It is a basic phone. You can text. It's got a GPS mapping on it. It's developing the Light phone 2 will have a payment adaptation. But there needs to be a school community contract for each year group. At the start of the year, all the parents are put in a room like this, and there's a discussion around what they're going to align as the envelope the children will do online. And expect parents to, in the same way that everything else the school sets on the parents, of what they can bring into school, how they should behave in the physical world. It becomes part of the family-school contract of if you're going to be part of this community, well, you know, if you're an ultra-libertarian, you've got to tether it back a bit. If equally you're, well, I can't remember what the phrase is brilliant, the lawnmower, you've got to, you know, not cut the grass. We've got to get our heads around this. We're still approaching this in a physical world sense, and it's to your point, it's a completely out of control space. So we've got to put the control in.
And doing it collectively and agreeing collectively and working with the school, it's absolutely.
We are, I'm afraid, going to have to bring things to a close now because there are quite a number of children who are very keen to get home and get on their devices.
No, you're keen to get home on your device.
I was joking. Can I firstly, on your behalf, thank all of our panellists here who have been there. I thank you as well for coming and joining us this evening, because that has made it really lively and interesting and engaging. We will, I am sure, be sharing some more information. Our panelists have very kindly offered or made reference to particular websites or information, and we will share that more widely. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.